Hello and welcome to NFTDB 401, an introduction to new section focals to the administrative functions of the National Flight Test Database. Our agenda today will include a purpose for this training. There is a prerequisite that's recommended. Describe the role of a section focal in the bigger picture. We'll then review fairly briefly the organizational concept of the NFTDB. Then we'll give you a tour of the admin module. This will be primarily what this training is about. We'll finish up with questions, and then thank you for your continued help in introducing this NFTDB nationwide. So basically, the brief is designed to provide an introduction for section focals, particularly new ones, to the NFTDB administrative functions. There's an assumption that you've already either watched the NFTDB 101, which is for contributors, basic users, if you will, and or you've used the database enough itself to understand what the functions are. If you're brand new to the NFTDB, this probably isn't the first thing you should be watching, and we'd encourage you to go watch that NFTDB 101 and use the database a little bit just to get familiar. So you as a section focal, and thank you by the way for volunteering, well I hope you volunteered to take on this role. The NFTDB has a number of roles with varying permission levels. Each role has its place in the use and the maintenance of the NFTDB, and so it all starts at the lowest end of permission, if you will, with a read-only user. An example of that might be a non-flight tester, a program manager. To be honest with you, at this point, we don't have a lot of plans to have a bunch of read-only users, but we do have the capability built into the system. Our main users are called contributors. So this is your run-of-the-mill pit test pilot, flight test engineer, human factors specialist, working on projects and using the NFTDB to track their work and write up response items, pass downs, and the like. Where you fit in is as a section focal. You will have increased permissions and you'll be able to use the administrative module that will not be apparent to the contributor users. They won't even see it. But you'll have access to that, and in doing so you'll be able to set up projects and set up aircraft for the projects and so forth, and we'll take you through that. There are also national focals, which right now, at least in the flight test community, consists of Joe Prickett, Charlie Roberts, and Bob Stoney. That list might expand as time goes on, but right now those are your national focals. They're the SMEs that helped develop the database and helped introduce it. The fundamental difference between these two is that there's backbone information, program management offices, and so forth that I'll get into in a little bit. But basically, the national focals have the ability to manage and create and edit and delete those aspects. The section focals are basically there to set up projects for the contributors to use. Let's briefly review the products that can be produced by the NFTDB. They consist of the daily report, which is a report concerning the flight or test that was done that day. Response items, which are items, problems that occurred on a test or on an evaluation that need to be responded to. Pass down, which is kind of a catch-all safety best practices term. And consolidated reports, which are basically summary reports. If you're not familiar with these, again, it's recommended that you go back and review NFTDB 101. The next thing to review ourselves about is the organizational concept and some of the terms. Flight test organizations, that's pretty easy, your section. PMOs are where the applicant makes an application to for a type certificate or STC, ASTC, etc. They're the ones that manage the project. Project category is a unique term to the NFTDB that's very important, particularly for section focals, to to understand, as is project size, large versus miscellaneous projects. And we're going to cover these last two in the next set of slides in some more detail. Continuing with that, the file cabinet analogy, if you will. Think of the PMO, Project Management Office, as a file cabinet. And those are ACOs, the International Validation Branch, and so on. Each file drawer is a project category. And this, again, is an NFTDB unique term. Very important to understand. When you pull open that drawer, there is file folders that are hanging in there that are subsets of that project category, and those are the individual projects. And every drawer has a miscellaneous project in it. So when we set up the database, we had to make some choices about the project categories. The PMOs are, as you're probably aware, currently a little bit in flux. We're going through a reorganization and a refinement. So we decided to go with the super ACO concept that was described in Lanscant's email earlier this year. And so what does that look like? Well, here is a depiction of those super ACOs. So Southwest CERT branch, that's the old LA, the DSCO, and Fort Worth. Southeast consists of Atlanta, Wichita, and Anchorage, which, if you know your geography, you know it's not very south or very east. The Northwest CERT branch is Seattle and Denver. Southeast is Chicago, the Engine CERT office, Boston, and New York. The Military CERT office, we're pretty familiar with that. The International Validation branch used to be split between the standard staffs, but it's now one office, Air 730, that was recently stood up. And they handle all the validations coming in. And then the BASU, which is basically the ACO for Boeing projects. So these are the PMOs as it currently exists in the NFTDB. We can change this. It'll be fairly painful, but we're sort of hoping that it stays this way, particularly as we build more and more work and more records in the database. There are some others, by the way. There's a no entry, a no PMO entry, just to use if there's some reason we haven't thought of. And then the flight test branch actually has its own PMO. Not that anybody's going to apply to us for a certificate, but we might get involved in things like research projects or other types of work. And so that's the catch-all there. Okay, so now that's the PMOs. Let's talk about those categories. So in general, the super ACOs all look pretty standard. They have a by-part organization, meaning Part 29, 27, 25, 23, and even 21 for things like restricted category, military surplus, that kind of thing. There's also a category for field approvals. And then it comes down to what the unique OEMs are in that super ACO's area. So this example here is the Northeast CERT branch. They've got Cirrus, IS&S, Avidyne, Augusta Westland, and Sikorsky. Each super ACO, of course, has their own OEMs, and so each has been organized with that in mind. If you have any changes to this that you want to make, you should contact us. They were all vetted through appropriate management, but that's not to say they're stagnant or can't be changed. So that's kind of a general look at what a super ACO looks like. Let's look at some of the other kinds of PMOs besides those what we used to know as the ACOs. The first one to talk about is the MCO, the Military CERT Office. They like their categories broken up by the service and the type aircraft, rotary wing or fixed wing. So you'll see a breakdown in that regard. The International Validation Branch is broken down by the foreign authority that is the CA, the certification authority. We're the VA, or validation authority, we the FAA. So it's broken down by the foreign authority and then the OEM. So for example, you see EASA here and Airbus. You see JCAB and the Mitsubishi. That's the MRJ, would be the first project within that category. And most of them have an other, a catch-all. And again, if we need to add some or we need to modify, the flexibility is built into the database to be able to do that. So that's what the International Validation Branch looks like. And lastly, the BASU, which is the ACO for Boeing. It's broken down by the type model from the 737 up to the 787. And when the MMA comes along, which is the maybe someday 737 replacement, it'll maybe be called the 797, and it'll get added. A project category will be added at that time. So that's a general look at how the project categories are broken down. The next thing to talk about, after talking about those categories, is whether projects themselves are large, and that's a little bit of a misnomer, or miscellaneous. That is the question. And this is one that's very confusing until you've done it a little bit. And even then, we still have a lot of questions about it. So large or miscellaneous, let's break that down a little bit. Fundamentally, the question is, do you want to spend the time for a large project to enter the specific information prior to commencing the project, prior to starting your flight test? And miscellaneous projects are those that you don't. Now, just because it's miscellaneous doesn't mean it gets lost. It doesn't mean that there's any less information that's available. It's just the setup ahead of time, and that setup provides a consistency. So let's look at those two, the large versus the miscellaneous, one at a time. So for a large, an example of that would be the 787 type certificate project. There were well over 200 test plans for that project. There were thousands of hours of flight tests that were conducted, and so that one's a no-brainer. We want to have very consistent data so we can, for example, look up all of the flights that were conducted on a specific test plan simply by searching in a consistent fashion that test plan. If you hand entered the test plan name for every flight, if the users typed it in, they'd all type it in slightly differently. And so you wouldn't have consistency in data retrieval. You'd also have to hand type it in every time instead of just picking from a list and having it autofill, that kind of thing. This does require the section focal to set up the project, so there's some workload in advance. It does provide, though, on the good side, the standardization and consistency that I just described, and easier use for the contributors. They don't have to pre or hand enter a bunch of data. It's all there. The project name, the project number, it's all loaded into a daily in advance. They don't have to do any work. A miscellaneous project, on the other hand, an example of that would be a single flight in-flight entertainment project. So you got assigned to a project often the day before. Sometimes these things happen. You hope not, but it does happen where you get assigned to a project and you go the next day. You don't want to spend the time to load all of the information in. You're just going to type it in when you type in your daily and you're done. So no advanced work is required. That's slice and smooth. Any inconsistencies in data entry that you make, you have to recognize that will result in inconsistent output or search. Like if you do 3 flights on a project and you're not consistent about how you enter your data, it may not show up all properly. And it's those tweeners that are the most difficult to assess. A 5-flight project, a 10-flight project. And I don't have a cutoff for you in terms of the number of flights expected. You just have to consider the advantages and disadvantages in each case when you decide whether to make something as large or miscellaneous. Okay, it's time to take a tour of the database. Okay, welcome to the NFTDB. Easy URL nftdb.fa.gov. After acknowledging a sign-in screen, you'll come to this webpage, your My Recent Items. Just briefly, remember you got My Recent Items, Project View, Default PMOs, Nationwide, and then within each of those you have these tables for the various products. But we're here to talk about you and your role as a section focal. And so that key there is this admin thing over here, this admin control. It's kind of off to the side. We kind of expect the section focals to be a slightly higher trained computer kind of bubbas, and so it's sort of hidden off over here on the side. A contributor user, just a regular user if you will not have this control shown. So when you touch that, here are your options. And this is organized just like we just talked about in the NFTDB. So you have manage flight test organizations, manage PMOs, manage categories. These first two, you're going to have view only. So if you open up the manage flight test organizations, you can see they're labeled here. Just like on many of the other screens, if you prefer for some reason to export this data to Excel, all you have to do is hit this Excel icon here. You can see on mine, because I'm a national focal, I can delete and edit these. You won't have these controls over here. You'll just be able to see them. But if you want to see them to understand kind of the big picture, you will see you'll see the data here. So that's manage FTOs. Then you have manage PMOs. Again, you won't have edit capability here, but you'll be able to view them. And on the manage project categories, you will have edit capability, but only on those project categories within your section that are related to your section. So you will have some and you won't have others, and you'll notice that by the controls for editing and deleting being missing. Please use these controls very carefully. You'll be affecting a lot of information. If you, I'm going to take a chance here and I'm going to hit this delete here. It should give me an alert. Okay, so it says this project category is associated with a bunch of projects, miscellaneous and large. In order to delete this category, we have to delete all of the documents associated with it. So there is some error tolerance in the system, but it's not necessarily going to be perfect. But we did try to prevent the loss of data, and so you'll see alerts like that come up. If you want to add something new here in a project category, here's the button to do it. You can see that. You'll have to first pick the PMO that's applicable, and so on. It's pretty intuitive. You'll pick the name of it and put a category description on it. I'm going to cancel that. Just like on all of the other screens, the basic navigation is very similar. The default sort is the updated on. So when this record or this item was last updated. You can see that it's active right now because it's got this dark blue table header. If I want to sort by PMO instead, I'm going to hit PMO. Now you notice these are still both blue. So that means this was first and this was second. So if I just want to sort by PMO, I'm going to touch that again. See how it went away and now it's just this blue? So right now we're sorting just by the PMO. And we're sorting in a descending order. I can sort in an ascending order by selecting here, and then that's neither order. And you see if you pick neither, boom, it goes back to the updated date as the default. It'll never go unsorted. If I want to know about the author, I can do that, and so on. So that's how, and that functionality for sorting works very, very similarly on all of these are called tables whenever you see line items like this. So the sorting is here. There's also this filtering. So let's say all I want to do, I'm up in the Northwest. I just want to look at the Northwest cert branch. So I select that, and you see now all I'm looking at is Northwest. And here are the categories within that. It shows you how many results you have down here. That sometimes is helpful. And right now it's defaulted to 10 per page. I personally want them all shown, but it defaults, I think, to 10. Or it goes back to the last used, but in general, if you're starting up a new, it'll do 10 per window. All right, so that's a look at categories. You, again, probably shouldn't be in here too much. The place where you'll first get your heavy action is in this Manage Projects. Okay, and this is the one I'm going to spend the most time describing to you. So your flight test project team, you and they have discussed it and decided that we want to set up a new large project within the database for their project. And so you direct them to the footer of the NFTDB page, which has this Excel form called NFTDB Project Setup. And all they need to do is take this and fill it out. It's got all of the information that you as a section focal will need. The orange fields are the absolutely required fields. There's only about a handful of them. The rest of them are things that are useful and helpful. They may need some help with it, things like the airworthiness standard and those kinds of things. But you'll see all of this information reflected in the database, and there's a little help column here to help them with examples and what they're supposed to fill out. So hopefully you'll get one of these filled out fairly completely. And at that point, you go to the NFTDB onto the Create Project. You go to the NFTDB and Manage Projects and add a new project. You want to make sure, first of all, that there isn't one in here. You don't really want to have a duplicate project in here. That'll just cause confusion. So you can either do a search, or just based on knowledge, you may know that it's not in there. But when you're ready to add it in, you do Add New Project. You'll see this stepper flow here. So there's a Create Project stepper flow. There's project information, which will be the first group of information you'll set up. Then you'll assign aircraft to the project. Test plans, very important, will be assigned. Project details, and then finally you'll be done. So let's go through this stepper flow one at a time. Project number is the pretty standard, either FAA project number or perhaps an ODA project number. The lead FTO code, you'll pick your FTO. Project Management Office, let's say in this case it's the Northwest CERT branch for me. Project category, let's say it's a helicopter project and it's not an OEM that's doing the project. So I picked this, but you got to pick the correct category down here. Applicant name, type that in. And hopefully you've got this all in that form that was filled out, so you're not having to do too much. It's okay, you can see which fields are required. The ones with the red stars are required. Airworthiness standard, and there are the little help bubbles here will help you. It's also reflected in that form that your flight test team filled out. But there's some help here, and the number of help will be expanding as time goes forward. We're already working on that. So the airworthiness standard, in this case, is also obviously Part 27. We thought about having automatic functionality here, but it's not always the case that there's a one-for-one correlation there. Part 1 category, this gets a little confusing because, frankly, it can be more than one of these. This is all what it says in Part 1, so in this case it's a rotorcraft and it's a category. Project management type, let's say this is FAA managed project. The lead flight test pilot, let's say, is Kevin Green. So we can just type in here Kevin Green and it'll autofill. Or if you prefer, you can hit the little caret down here and scroll down and have them show up. The submit RI to, not a required field, but this would be the email address of somebody that where you would send a response item to at the applicant. So in the case of Boeing, for example, they have a group mailbox, but for this applicant here, they don't have such a thing. Same thing with the pass down. Part 1 class, in this case, is a rotorcraft, and these are just definitions from Part 1, so don't blame us. The lead project FTE, let's say, is John Head, so I start typing that in and fill that in. The product type, this can get a little confusing if you're having a new propeller on an engine on an airplane, but in this case it's an aircraft. The make, the Robinson Model 44. The TCDS, we can go look that up. I don't know that off the top of my head, but you can look that up. This is a required field, the project name, and this you want to be fairly succinct but complete. So let's say an STC to install a new engine on the Robinson R44. The project type is an ATC, or it's an STC. I just said that. And you can see all of the options that are here, including things like field approval and special project and so forth. And you can have a brief project description in here, which might go very similar to the project name, but perhaps a little bit more detail. You know, increasing the horsepower, whatever you want to put in there. Okay? Now I have an option with these controls. I can either save and close and come back to it later, or let's continue on this stepper flow, and I'm going to hit next and for the aircraft. You can see you've got controls to go back, previous. You can also go forward to the next stepper flow, which is test plans. None of the rest of this information, by the way, is required. As soon as the save button goes filled in, that means at that point you can stop if you want to. It's ready to save and it'll be complete. But I encourage you, because it's easier to do it while you're thinking about it, to do it at this time rather than think, oh, I'll come back later and get it. Do it when you can. Okay, so for the aircraft, you can select aircraft, and basically every aircraft in the database is in here. And so I haven't shown you this before, but you can just start typing right in here. We could put R44. Okay, it looks like there's one R44 in the database so far. Now it could be R44 without a dash in it. There doesn't have to be any, so be a little careful about that. But that's not the aircraft that I want. If it was, I could select it. But this particular project, this is a new for this project aircraft. So I'm going to have to do a new aircraft profile. So I hit the new aircraft profile right here. Aircraft make, Robinson, R44, aircraft registration, November 1234. The serial number is 44-102, whatever it is. Aircraft category is the same as before. It's a rotorcraft, and it's operated by the applicant, RS Industries, and the TCS. Again, you can fill that in. So I'm going to save that now. And here it is. The aircraft's right here on my list. I can do that again if I have 2 or 3 or whatever aircraft in the flight test program. Let's say that this particular project just has the one. There's some other information that I can fill in down here, and you Navy guys will recognize this from the flight test reports that you learned in the Navy. But you can have a description of the aircraft. This will be particularly helpful. It says here required for TIR Part 2. That's a consolidated report. So if you are planning on having a summary report, either a TIR Part 2 or just a consolidated report of some other kind, you should fill this information in here about the test aircraft as well as the test instrumentation system. But let's say in this case that I'm not planning on doing that, and so I'll leave that information blank. So I'm ready to move on. I've got the aircraft, all the aircraft accounted for. I'm going to go to the test plans next. The functionality here is very similar. It's less information for the test plan because basically it's just the title of the test plan, and that can include the document number if you like. I typically don't include the revision level. We considered having the rev level of it somehow tracked, but it just becomes onerous in terms of feeding the beast. If you want it though, you could put in a rev A and a rev B and a rev C and keep track of all that. That'll be up to you. So your choices here are basically either to type in the name. So let's say I'll go TP001-000-01 stability and control test. I can add that flight test plan. Let's say I've got another one, 001-000-02 smoke testing. Whatever the name of the test plan is. You can have a much longer name if you want. It's up to you. Many test plans that are written by the applicant have their specific nomenclature. They have a document name and a long name on there. Just put that on there so that when you pull up the test plan, maybe the TIA refers to it that way, it's all consistent. So now I've got those two test plans in here. I can type in as many as I want. There is this cool feature here, which is to upload test plans. And this will be particularly useful if you have a large number of test plans. This information icon here shows that you have to either have a CSV file or an Excel file. It can only have one tab. It can only have one line per test plan, and they've got to be in column A. And there's a 700 character limit to the test plan. That shouldn't be a problem. So let me show you what that looks like. So I'm going to hit upload test plans. Now I'm going to go find my list. And in this case, I have a sample list in here, sample test plan data. This happens to be in CSV, but it works as well with XLS. Okay, and it'll tell you if you have an error in there. I am not sure why that has an error. I think we did this for a test. But you can see that all of the other test plans were, they were loaded right in here. There's quite a few of them. This was something we did for beta testing, but it's pretty slick. So if you prepare it in advance on that Excel, it makes it much easier. And many applicants, if you ask them, will give you a list. So you can say, can you please provide me a list? Tell them what format you want in it. And it makes it much easier to load that up. So that's test plans. The next part of the stepper flow is project details. Most of this information, again, is required for that summary report like a TIR, aka consolidated report. The background, the purpose, the scope of testing, the method of testing. It's highly unlikely that you'll be able to do all of this now, and so this would come later in the project when you're ready to do it. So now we're done. We're going to hit finish, and we are complete. So I'm going to select this button back to manage projects. Here's that project. In the future, if I want to go back in, I can edit it, I can just view it, or I could delete it. And that's how you create and manage projects. There's also aircraft profiles. To be frank, the use of this is probably to correct information that's in there. Typically, you may or may not want to use that. And there's also managed personnel. You can add, in the case of, all the FAA flight testers should be put in here by us, SMEs, prior to going live on this, but you may want to put in your own folks from your applicants. Again, you can decide whether you want them in there or not. I'm going to show you, if you wanted to do it, how you could add them in, maybe a program manager. So there's two types here. There's FAA or non-FAA. So let's cover the FAA case here. So I'm going to add them from personnel directory. And I'm going to pick Lance Gant. So I'm going to type in Gant and hope this works. I'll tell you the find. There's 14 results here, so there he is right there. So I'm going to select him, and so that preloads his name and his email. I'm now going to assign him to a flight test organization. I'm going to pick which his default PMOs are, and he needs to tell me this. So either he or his manager needs to tell me what they want for their default PMOs. And this is something you can change later. If it's not quite right, you can go back in here and change it too for the folks in your section. So I'll assign him to those 5 default PMOs. I'm going to make him a contributor, and I'm going to make him an FTPE. For those human factors folks wondering, where am I? Well, you're an FTE. So we had a conscious decision not to break out human factors. Human factors folks are also FTEs, and often vice versa. So anyway, that's what we decided. If they're a program manager, then you'd select them as other. Okay, and then you save them, and they'll show up on the list here. Okay, the other type of personnel of the other case is non-FAA. And you'll see a lot of similarities here, except of course there's no lookup capability. So you have to type in the name. So we'll just call this person John Smith. They're with the RS Industries company. Job role. And this basically drives where they, when you're looking them up on the daily, which section that they'll be looked up on. If you want to, you could add a DER or AR number. That's up to you. And you can also add an email. There's really no automatic emailing function, so this email is more informational, I guess. I'll be honest, I don't use it very much. But there is potential, I guess, in the future for it to be somehow automatically notified. But for right now, that's an optional field. Just like on every other page, you can see the required fields have the asterisk. There is also, like on many other pages and web pages here, that there's error tolerance. So if you try to enter the same person again twice, it'll typically give you an error message. So we'll save John Smith, a flight test engineer with RS Industries, and you'll see them show up here on the list. This table here is much like the other tables where you can search and find and sort. So you have that capability with you as well. So in summary, for you section focals, we've taken you through all of the functions here on this admin page. You have everything you need. I will note that it's not available in the offline mode. You must be online. You must be VPN'd in for these admin functions to work. The offline mode is only for creating dailies and RIs and PDs as a contributor. Very well. Well, that concludes NFTDB 401 for the section focals. If you do have any questions, I would point out that the user's guide has answers about the main or non-administrative functions part of the database. There isn't anything specific in that user's guide about admin functions. I believe that's planned for later. But if you have questions about other aspects, the main aspects, then you should look there. Otherwise, for questions, please contact the SMEs, Joe, Charlie, or myself, and we will do our best. And please keep the suggestions coming, especially if you see an issue. The database is being introduced. It's new. It's probably going to have some hiccups, and we want to make it better. And the developer of the database is extremely responsive in continuing to make it better. So bring us your suggestions and questions. And with that, I will thank you very much for your time and hope that we can all get out and do some real flying instead of talking about databases. Be well.